Hey everybody, coming at you from the middle of nowhere, Kansas. Wanted to show you this Ravens build while I have the chance and I'm away from some peoples. So, how does this build work? We have Ravens. This is going to be our main damaging ability. Why Ravens, you ask? So they have buffed Ravens so much, like 4 or 5 times, I want to say now, right? It actually just does a lot of damage base. So I am going to show you some multipliers you can put on it, and then there's also some additive multipliers that got added with the temperings. So that's going to be the first thing. So we're going to be using Ravens. We're going to be spamming this. How are we going to be spamming it though? We have Ravens CDR. So Ravens CDR is going to take this down to 0. So you can see 27.6, 27.6, and then a CDR roll on the amulet, and then a CDR roll on the helmet is going to get you to 100%. Keep in mind, with the new masterworking system, you can also just roll masterworks on your Ravens cooldown introduction. So like if it's really early on and you're just trying to get the build together, just find the tempering manual for Ravens cooldown introduction. Try to masterwork it up to where you can get that 100%, and then boom, you can play this build. And even without any stat stuff, like none at all, this build is going to be very good at a base level because, again, companion base damage is very, very high. So you're going to feel pretty strong pretty early on with this build. The key thing and why we want all this other stuff is so it actually scales into higher end content, right? But overall, when it comes to just doing like Hell Tides, base World Tier 4 stuff, you know, just things that aren't super high end, like without any stat optimization, this build's going to be pretty damn strong, which is also why I'm like, damn, this is really, really cool. Because it's just an option that people can do that doesn't require you to farm uniques. It doesn't require you to do any of the really annoying stuff. You don't need a Tempest Roar, you know, etc. Right? So, that being said, next up, right, so that's just how to get the build functional, is Ravens cooldown introduction. Number one thing you need, highest priority over everything, right? If you want to play this Ravens only build, you got to get that CD, to 0. So what that's going to require you to do is find a tempering manual and then make it to World Tier 4 so you can do the pits. And then just go temper on Ravens cooldown introduction, try to masterwork it a little bit, and then wham bam, thank you, ma'am. You have your 0 CD. Okay, moving on. So how do we make it better now? How do we improve the damage of Ravens? So they added on another tempering plus Ravens damage, and they added on a lot of it. So you have 814% Ravens damage that you could get on the weapon if it's masterworked. You have 407% here, 407, 407, and then 407. So that's 2400% additive damage you can get. There is no skill in the game that has access to that much additive damage from like just one specific thing. Like that's wild, right? And that's just the additive damage you're getting from that. You have to remember, you still get critical strike damage. You still get critical strike chance, right? You still get to benefit from all of that good stuff. So like there's just so much additive damage Ravens has access to, it almost makes up for the fact that they don't have any crazy multipliers, but they do have some multipliers, right? So the next thing I want to go over before I get into those multipliers is the Ravens attack speed. I want to explain how that works. So Ravens notoriously in previous seasons, their passive sucked. The reason why though is not because it doesn't do like an okay amount of damage, it's because it's too slow. It says every 5 seconds this thing does damage. That's way too slow for it to be good, right? So that's another reason why, you know, I've always said the value of companions is always in the active. The active is always the best thing, and that's why you saw me do things like pack leader and really focus on just being able to spam the actives, is because that is where all their damage was. Now it's actually a little bit different, because with Raven's attack speed, it reduces that cooldown. So I had 60% attack speed on the PTR, and it reduced it down to 3 seconds. So here I have it as 40, 60, and then another 40% here. That's 140%, so it's almost double. So like I'm kind of theorizing, because it doesn't factor it in on this Maxroll calculator yet, that it's going to take it down to like 1 or 2 seconds by having that, right? And this coming out 1 or 2 seconds, you have to remember from a DPS perspective, it's like 5xing the DPS. If I could take this from a 5-second DPS thing to a 1 second, like that's an astronomical increase. And Raven's passive damage actually is the highest out of all of the companions. Why is that, you might ask? Okay, well, aside from just the pure amount of buffs, they have this. Increases the passive damage by 40% multiplicatively. Plus, you get 2 additional Ravens to periodically attack enemies, right? So it's like they just have a lot of things that buff their passive damage, whereas you compare it to Wolves, right? Like Wolves' passive damage, so see here, it does 200% and then 32.2%. It's like, it's pitiful. Like it's very pitiful comparatively, like when you compare it to Ravens. Now keep in mind, Wolves' passive damage is up a lot from what it used to be in this season. So I'm not saying Wolves is bad. I will be doing a Wolves only build as well. I'm just doing Ravens first because I thought it looked really cool. So yeah, so Raven's attack speed to buff the passive damage on it. On top of that, you also have this Paragon glyph as well that buffs it by your companion passive damage by 130% multiplicatively. So yeah, so that's 170% multiplicative damage that Ravens has on its passive, plus all this additive damage and whatnot, right? So the passive is actually really cracked. So if we can get that down to 1 second, it's going to be some pretty decent single target DPS, right? And then we'll have the active is our AoE DPS. So this is really going to be kind of an all-rounder build in terms of what it can do, because you're going to be able to not only still get that single target DPS on a boss, but you'll be able to spam the Ravens constantly, like right on top of the boss. So you'll have like 5 Ravens things going. Like that's just like, what? You know what I mean? Like on top of the boss or whatever you're fighting. So this build should have some insane DPS for bosses. It should have insane AoE clear. Overall, this build should be kind of an all-rounder in terms of what you can do. Okay, so that's how the Raven's attack speed work. And the last piece to this puzzle is Raven's size. What this does is increases that circle, because you're probably thinking up to this point, okay, it sounds good, but the Raven circle is small. What if I told you you can triple the size of that circle? So plus 99% Raven size. I do focus on masterworking this because I only run it on these 2 things. And if in the event that I don't need the attack speed on Ravens, I'm going to drop it off this, right? So like if I only need like 100%, for example, to get to what I want to go to, I'm going to drop it off the gloves and I'm going to go another Raven size thing here, and I'll probably masterwork it. But you have plus 100%, and then this does like, the way it stacks is like different. So it's like the plus 100% actually stacks on top of the previous 100%. So you end up getting like triple the size out of both of these multipliers. That's why you see like Necros and stuff where they like increase their, what do you call it? Their aura. I forget what the hell those things, like decrepify. That's what it is. Like their decrepify sizes and stuff like that. Like that's why it like hits the whole screen in season 4. It's like the similar concept, right? So yeah, so that right there is kind of like the core temperings of the build. So now just kind of going into things that actually multiplicatively buff the damage. So on the weapon, we're going to go of the Stampede. They buffed Stampede by a few percent to bring it up to 30, so that means it's going to go up to 60% now, which is pretty solid. So it's a 60% multiplier to your companion skills, and it also gives you 1 additional companion, so that helps out with your passive damage, I believe, even more. Moving right along, you have Edge Masters. We're putting on the necklace. This is going to give us another 30% damage increase because this is a spiritless build. You don't need any resource in this build, so you're always going to be full. So that's another 30%. Come down here, I have Ring of the Elements. This is going to be another 30%. Now this does only happen every 7 seconds, but the thing is like there's not really a whole lot of good options here, because you don't want to run something like Hunter Zenith, for example, to like try to do some debilitating roar shenanigans, because you lose the cooldown reduction, you lose the Raven's damage, and this is kind of where the first downside of this build comes in, is while yes, this build will do damage, I promise it will. And I do think that this build is going to land somewhere in like probably, honestly, if I'm being honest, probably the B tier for the reasons I'm about to say, is that it's going to do a bunch of damage. You're going to be able to do like majority of the content, if not all content in the game. But when you compare it to other builds, it can't really get into the A or S tier because it doesn't have 100% build efficiency, right? So, you know, you don't have like, you know, if you go look at like Where NATO or something, they have 100% exactly what they need to have, and it combos perfectly, right? Like this is just okay. It's like it's just the best thing you have access to, but it's not really that great, right? And then you go over here, right, to like Wild Rage, and Wild Rage is cool, but like at the same time, you have to stay inside of like this form for 2 seconds. So that again, it just makes your build awkward and clunky. So like what a lot of people are going to end up doing is just not going Bestial Rampage and then going Ursine Strength, and then it's like, well, what do you even put here, right? It's like, well, what do you even do here? Let's see here. Like there isn't really like a whole lot to do. You see what I'm saying? Like there's not not really a whole lot to do. So yes, yeah. The only thing I could think of is like maybe something with Thorns, but even then, like Druid doesn't really have anything that combos super well with Thorns, so it's like, why even, you know what I mean? It's like, why even care? But yeah, so, but you can see here, there's just not really a whole lot of options unless you're trying to just add like a mastery skill and then go like Shepherd's Aspect or something. Like, 'cause I guess you could maybe do Shepherd's Aspect, but even that's not that good because you're not running the other companion skills, so it's like, it's just not that, it's really not that great, right? So there's not really a whole lot of good options here, and that's kind of the biggest downside to Ravens, is that they just lack legendary options, right? Like the reason why it's going to be strong is because of just how much base damage they have. It's not because they have any crazy legendary, it's not because they have any crazy unique, it's they just have a lot of base damage. That's it. And they have really low CDR, so you can spam it. Okay, but yeah, so that's kind of getting off my soapbox there. But yeah, so that's kind of how you're going to increase it. Then I also ran Ring of Accursed Touch because, again, kind of in that vein of we don't really have any good options. But what this does do, oh my gosh, is it gives us access to Vulnerable, because enemies, it says up to a 35% chance for your skills to inflict Vampiric Curse on enemies. Enemies afflicted with Vampiric Curse are also vulnerable. So what this does is gives us much easier access to Vulnerable than anything, which in a way is like a 20% damage amp, right? Now there are ways that you can get Vulnerable that don't have to do with this. Like for example, if you find that you don't really care for the passive damage, you could take this off and just put Ferocious Ravens on. So it says they become vulnerable, but even that's only 3 seconds, so it's like not even that great. But then again, if you're spamming Ravens, I guess you could keep things perma and vulnerable with that. But then again, the question kind of becomes, well, what do we even run here? You know, like if we're not running this, what do we run? You know, just kind of looking around, and it's like, well, not really anything super interesting. Not really anything super interesting at all. The only thing is you could just move Edge Masters to here, and then you could maybe run a utility aspect on the necklace, right? Because you don't need rapid aspect. I mean, aspect of retribution maybe, but like even then, it's like we don't have solid access to stun or knock down, so this would be the only way we're proccing it, so like that's not really even that good. So again, kind of comes back to we don't have insanely good options here. Conceited aspect maybe you could potentially do, but then you have to find a way to keep a barrier up. So one thing you could do, I suppose, is you could run conceited aspect, and then you'd have to run a utility aspect. You have to run like a utility aspect on your amulet. So you could move like Edge Masters here, just run Ursine Strength, and then you'd have to run a utility aspect. But then, if you drop Wild Rage, right, for Conceited, well, you could just not run Conceited and run Wild Rage and then have the exact same amount of damage. So, yeah, pretty much. But anyways, moving right along from that. So that's all the damage multipliers here. So for defense, we are going to be going Juggernauts just to get extra armor. Raven ranks to Ravens, cooldown, max life, Ravens attack speed, debilitating roar CD. Debilitating roar CD is just the best other option because you can't do like Ravens attack speed and Raven size on one item. So yeah. So debilitating roar is reducing that cooldown, so we can try to have like nice access to that's pretty good. Yeah, and then on the chest piece, we are doing concussive strikes. So this is also another free just damage multiplier in a defensive slot, because we do have a 45% lucky hit just base with Ravens. So that's pretty cool. So it gives us 20% extra damage. So armor, max life, defensive skills, Ravens attack speed, debilitating roar cooldown. Yeah, wild rage for the bestial rampage combo, critical strike damage, critical strike chance, Ravens damage, Ravens attack speed. And the reason why is because I believe it's in the utility slot, so like you can't have like the same slot of items. I think Raven's attack speed is considered utility, and yeah, Raven's size is also considered utility. Then we're going rabies. Now the reason why we have rabies is because in virulent aspect is that lets us reduce the cooldown to make it to where it's off cooldown very quickly, because we also have, you know, the 22% CDR here, meaning this is going to go down to like, I don't know, like a 10 or 9 second cooldown. So as long as we're infecting a decent amount of things, we'll have rabies up pretty quickly. And that allows us to keep up things like our heightened malice and stuff like that from the Paragon tree. But yeah, armor, max life, all resist. And I can drop a little bit of the armor. I have a little bit too much armor, I think. But yeah, for a different stat. But I'll focus on that later. So then... oh yeah, so Raven size, debilitating roar, and then max life, move speed, resist all, Raven size, movement speed, and then 40% increased movement speed when moving away from slowed or chilled enemies. So whenever we use rabies on something, that makes them slowed. Because of our skill tree passive here, neurotoxin. So poisoned enemies are slowed, so that's going to give us a cool movement speed bonus. But really here you could use any movement speed bonus you want. You could do aspect of slaughter. Yeah, so you gain 20% movement speed, you lose it after taking damage. Heck, you could do aspect of metamorphosis, I guess, if you wanted to, but I think just doing movement speed is just gonna be better. Okay, so onto the weapon. So yeah, so stampede, willpower, crit, attack speed, Raven's damage. The reason why I go attack speed on some of this stuff is just because, you know, having more attack speed just gets you out more Ravens faster, so that's pretty good. Amulet, so Call the Wild, critical strike chance, cooldown, Raven's damage, cooldown reduction, critical strike chance, critical strike damage, resist all, critical strike chance, critical strike damage, and then lucky hit chance, Raven's cooldown. But yeah, so that's going to be it for the legendary items and kind of a base explanation of the build. Kind of going on to the skill tree. So again, another issue we have with our skill tree is we don't even have a whole lot of things that we can put points into. I mean, yeah, we could put points in here, but it doesn't reduce the cooldown, so it's kind of whatever. We could put points here, but it doesn't reduce the cooldown, so it's kind of whatever. We've already maxed out debilitating roar that does reduce the cooldown, so that actually is pretty relevant. Like in terms of, you have heightened senses, you could do this, but this bonus isn't even going to be up very much, but it probably is a decent option, I guess, because it gives you extra movement speed, gives you some damage reduction, but still, it's like, I guess you could go these, but still, it's like I always just find myself with points, and I'm not 100% sure what to do with them, really. Because I have everything you could use, you know, you have Call the Wild, you have, you know, maxed out Ravens. It's like, alright, well, what else really buffs Ravens? And the answer is not really a whole lot. We have, you know, we have critical strike chance against close enemies. Okay, cool. So again, just another thing where it's like Ravens just like this build until they develop companions more. Like for example, maybe making a companion Paragon board, making more companion skill trees. You know, things that have to do with companions. It's just gonna be a rough life for going a pure Ravens, specifically a pure Ravens build. Okay, Paragon. So, when it comes to Paragon, the cool thing is they did make it to where they're going to now benefit from 100% of your stats. So before, it was really awkward because some of the stats like did apply and some didn't. But now that everything applies, we know that we can get damage while in human form is going to go to our Ravens. It's also going to give us 10% damage reduction while in human form, which is going to be pretty nice, and damage reduction is a pretty sought after stat now because defenses got changed. They removed all the damage reduction stats on armor. So yeah, and this is just going to give us a bunch of extra damage while in human form. Coming up here, then we have our main. This is the main glyph that you want to get the moment you can. So this is going to give us 130% increased passive damage on top of a bunch of additive damage, so 267% additive damage for our companion skills, which is pretty nice. Moving over here, Spirit. This gives us a 12% damage amp for critting. We also get 194% critical strike damage. This combos really well with the fact that we're running Petrify, which gives us 50% increased critical strike damage, and we're also stacking critical strike damage on our, on our rings, on our weapon as well. So we do actually have quite a lot of critical strike damage, and we do have a lot of crit chance as well. So 7.2, let's see, 14.5. What the heck? Oh, is this not? I'm confused. Why is this 14.5 and this one's 7.2? Oh, because that's an amulet. Derp. That's why I'm going like crazy. Because that's an amulet, not the other rank. That's, man. I'm having a moment here. Okay, so then we have Heightened Malice here. Increase the damage by 45%. That's what we use Rabies to active that. That's again another issue, is we do not have a single legendary node that actually is beneficial aside from Heightened Malice. This is the only one. This is the only one, and it's like, it's not even that good because you have to have 3 things poisoned to deal the extra damage. So like, it's not like, I don't get this in a boss fight. Oh, it's so tragic. It's so tragic. It's so funny, right? Here we have Undaunted. So we will be fortified a lot because of Bolster, and we have, 3 defensive skills. So we definitely will be fortified a lot, and then we're going to have, again, another 10% damage reduction. Here we have Territorial, damage to close extra damage to close enemies on top of 10% damage reduction, which is pretty sweet. And then moving over here, we have Guzzler, 30% increased potion healing, and then just more 106% increased damage while healthy. So yeah, just good stuff. Just a bunch of additive damage again that we can get, and then a bunch of damage reduction. Kind of going around picking up things like Resist All where we can, picking up things like attack speed up here because attack speed's pretty good. I don't even wait. What? Okay, I don't know why I have that here. Okay, I knew something was off. What the heck? Yeah, so 5% attack speed here, or 7.5% attack speed here. Some extra attack speed here, so that's pretty good. But yeah, so that's kind of what the Paragon board looks like right now. God, like in the future, hopefully they add in a companion Paragon board. That would be amazing. But yeah, so but that's really going to be it. Aside from, this is what the skill tree looks like, and again, I'll have a link in the description below for this stuff. But yeah, so just to kind of summarize and recap, the way this build works is we utilize the CDR temperings to bring our Ravens down to a 0 CD, and then we utilize the temperings along with a bunch of other additive damage stuff, and then as many multipliers as we can on top of the Raven's attack speed temperings to increase the damage, to make up for the fact that we do not actually have any good solid aspects for them except for Stampede. I think Stampede is the best Raven's aspect that they have, but that's a general one that applies to all companions, not just Ravens. So it's not like it was specifically tailored for Ravens. But yeah. And if they nerf cooldown reduction on Ravens to where you can't get it to 0, this build is dead in the water. But we will see. I thought it was fun. I figured it was worth posting. So anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Like, subscribe if you want to see more. And thanks for watching.